The following examines in chronological order 3 treaties that influence international policies about global climate change: United Nations Law of the Sea, Montreal Protocol on Substances that Deplete the Ozone Layer, and Kyoto Protocol to the Framework Convention on Climate Change. In past centuries, territorial waters of a maritime state extended 3 nautical miles from shore, the range of 18th century land-based canons. Within this 3-mile limit, the state had exclusive rights to regulate trade and extract natural resources. Beyond the 3-mile limit lay international waters that were open to all nations but belonged to none. By the 20th century, not only did the range of canons greatly exceed the 3-mile limit, but also maritime states were eager to expand their territorial waters and assert control over additional offshore resources. The United States in 1945 laid claim to all of its continental shelf, and other nations quickly followed suit. Between 1946 and 1950, Argentina, Chile, Peru, and Ecuador extended their territorial waters as far offshore as 200 nautical miles to include their Humboldt Current fishing grounds. Other nations extended their territorial seas to 12 nautical miles. Today, Jordan is the only state that still uses the 3-mile limit. The United Nations convened the first UN Conference on the Law of the Sea in Geneva, Switzerland from 1956 through 1958 and drafted 4 treaties. Although the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea was successful in addressing many issues, it did not resolve the extent of territorial waters. A second UN Conference on the Law of the Sea met for 6 weeks in Geneva in 1960 but made little progress. A third UN Conference on the Law of the Sea began in New York with 160 participant states in 1973 and continued until 1982, when it culminated in the Law of the Sea Convention Treaty. This treaty came into force in 1994 after the 60th state ratified it. Yes, you heard it right. The treaty was 9 years in the making and required another 12 years before it took effect. International negotiations demand great patience. The treaty defines various coastal boundary zones, measured from a carefully defined territorial sea baseline. Normally, this baseline follows the coastline at low tide, but a state may draw a straight baseline if a coastline is deeply indented, has fringing islands, or is highly unstable. The treaty also provides specification for 6 types of coastal boundary zones. Number 1, internal waters are all water and waterways on the landward side of the territorial sea baseline. A coastal state is free to set laws, regulate use, and use any of the resources in its internal waters. Foreign vessels have no rights to passage through internal waters. Number 2, territorial waters extend out to 12 nautical miles from the sea baseline. A coastal state is free to set laws, regulate use, and use any of the resources in its territorial waters. Vessels have the right of innocent passage through territorial waters, where they can pass in an expeditious and continuous manner which does not threaten the peace of the coastal state. Submarines must navigate on the surface and show their flag. Number 3, contiguous zones extend from 12 to 24 nautical miles from the sea baseline. A coastal state can enforce laws regarding smuggling or illegal immigration within this zone. Number 4, exclusive economic zones extend 200 nautical miles from the sea baseline. A coastal state has sole exploitation rights over all natural resources such as fishing or oil within this zone. Foreign states have freedom of navigation and overflight subject to the regulations of coastal states and may lay submarine pipes and cables. Number 5, continental shelf refers to the coastal plain associated with a continent. The continental shelf may never exceed 350 nautical miles from the baseline, nor exceed 100 nautical miles beyond the distance from shore, where the waters reach a depth of 2,500 meters. A coastal state has exclusive rights to harvest non-living materials in the subsoil of its continental shelf and living resources attached to the continental shelf, but not to the sea life in the water column.